I'm so sick of my narrative. Like, why am I so attached to this is who I am? And I think what psychedelics do, which you said really, really beautifully, is just like, let me see a different perspective. Maybe there's another story here that I haven't considered.
Dr. Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. First and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
I'm mostly doing fine, but I just mentioned I live in Florida right now, and we're waiting for another hurricane. So that's always a bit anxiety, but otherwise I'm good.
Well, yeah, like I said before we're recording, best wishes. Hopefully everything is okay and everyone stays safe. But to make a complete U-turn, as I do in my great podcasting space here, let's just jump right into talking about sex. Before we get into actually sexual trauma, I kind of want to be a little bit broad and ask you about why just the idea of talking about sex makes people a little awkward, because we'll watch it in a movie. Some of us watch a lot of, pornography, or we'll read a lot of books that are very like graphic and romantic and erotic. But when it comes to actually expressing, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, or just generally just talking about it, there just like seems to be this like big hesitation. And I'm talking as a guy who was in a lot of locker rooms growing up, where those things just like we talk about it in a very weird, not a helpful way at all. And so, just riffing off that for a little bit.
Great question. And I think the simplest answer is because we all think that we're weird or there's something wrong with us, and we're having all these conversations in our head and not with each other. I mean, if you grew up in the United States, you certainly did not have great sex education. There's a good chance your parents didn't talk to you about sexuality. So you had to learn it from porn, or you had to learn it from the locker room and your friends. And a lot of that is misinformation. I'm a proponent of porn. Porn is great. I use it in my work sometimes. Of course, it can be overused. But what I'm very clear about, porn is entertainment. It is not education. And I think for so many boys, especially, so the median age that a young boy will see porn is between 9 and 11 years old. Like, that's way too young. They have no idea what to do with it. So they think that that's real. And again, it's entertainment. It shouldn't be used as education, but it gets a lot of us stuck.
Yeah. It's funny because like I used to be a professional wrestler, like WWE. And so I found that at the same time that I found porn. And so both of them are kind of similar in regards to like, two people are pretending to portray this act. In wrestling, they're portraying to have a fight. And in porn, they're portraying to be like two intimate partners having sex. Well, then you can get into some other stuff that's not very intimate, but it's outside of the point, right? The general stuff is that's the idea. And as a young kid, I found both to be the most real thing that I'd ever seen in my whole life. And it does warp your sense a little bit of what's real. Like, what do I do with a woman? What is she supposed to do with me? Like, is it only about me? Is it only about her? Is it about us? And that's very hard to decipher as a young boy when all you see on screen is like a really beautiful woman doing these like cool things, that you've sort of never seen before. And then in the same regard, I was watching wrestling and I saw these big dudes running around being jacked. And I was like, that's what I'm going to pursue as a career. And also at the same time, it sort of warped my idea of what sex is. And then mentioned being inside of locker rooms and being around a lot of guys. That also is, the way we talk about some things can be, let's just say, detrimental, to say the least, to our evolution or how we treat women and things of that nature. And so at least that was my experience. And then a lot of the guys that I've talked to or try to talk to, at least my best friends now, that we're talking about this, and all of us have wives, and it's much different now because we can actually share something with our partner about what we like and what we don't like. And so that's sort of been my arc. And I don't know if you've seen that with a lot of the people that you've worked with, or if the young boys that, you've seen, or whatever the case may be.
That's usually how it goes, but people seek out more information. So usually there becomes like a pain point with porn or erotica or just a lack of sex. So we shut down in some way. For a lot of guys, they'll experience erectile dysfunction. So if you watch enough porn and you're constantly increasing the intensity of the porn you're watching, there could be a point when you're laying in bed with a real human next to you where things don't work how you would like it to, because you're not getting that intense stimuli. So this is, and if you tend to be anxious, if you tend to go into performance mode, which Aaron, like the parallels between wrestling and porn are so interesting, but it's all about performance. But you can imagine with a real life person where you're supposed to be intimate and pleasure centered, performance is on the opposite end of the spectrum of that. So there can be issues that come in. And I just want to say, again, I don't want to pathologize porn. I will prescribe it for some of my clients. We'll use it in different ways. It's just how much and what meaning do you give it? And do you derive it as like, this is what I want to do? This is how I want to be able to perform? Or is this just fun and I can use it for entertainment and some sexual stimulation on occasion?
Yeah, I mean, everything can sort of turn to a vice of excess if there's no intentionality behind it, right? That's like everything. Like I had you have a traumatic event in your life, and we'll get to that. Like you're going to dive into something, and that thing on the surface could be good, like working out or thinking about your eating, but that can all turn into something really quite dangerous if there's no intentionality behind it, or if you're not doing it at a level that's healthy for you. Like, so that could be said for anything. And of course there's going to be dangers, to all sorts of things, especially pornography for, like I said, for young boys, like just because we just don't have the structure when we're young to figure out that's like watching the Avengers movie. Oh, those people are cool. Like, but that's not real. Like, I'm not going to be able to put on a cape and fly around. And so I can use it in that way, but very hard for someone to have that intentionality when this is the first thing they've seen. So that's always been interesting for me, but and then, moving past sort of the idea of, why it's so hard to talk about sex, you have your area of super expertise is this idea of sexual trauma. Why do you call it specifically trauma and not labeling it abuse or anything else like that?
My answer is sexual trauma is really an umbrella term, and under sexual trauma is going to be rape, sexual abuse, gender violence, sexual harassment, any of those subcategories that we have. And Aaron, in the work I do, it's really important to me that I identify exactly what happened to my client. So if they were raped, I'll go through the definition of rape. If it was sexual abuse, we go through that. And then I ask them, when we're talking about your trauma, do you want me to call it when you were raped, or do you want me to say when you experienced sexual trauma? And this is a personal preference for everyone. Some people are like, oh, it feels empowering to call it what it was. And for other people, they're like, when I hear sexual abuse or gender violence, it's a little too triggering for me still. So I'd rather just have us talk about sexual trauma.
And have you found the way that the person labels it, is there any difference in the way that they heal from it, or it's all just part of their own personal experience?
It's part of their own personal experience. It's just important that we do label it. So if we've labeled it, and I can explain, you were actually, we can say it's sexual trauma, but you were actually raped because there was penetration of the genitals, which is the definition of rape. And they're like, okay, I can take that in. And I give them some research, some literature about it. And they're like, you know what, it's just still a little bit too confronting for me to name that in our weekly session. So I want to call it sexual trauma. Or when I tell my partner about it, if I'm going to tell friends and family about it, it just feels better to me to not be as specific. I just want to keep that for myself, and I'm going to call it sexual trauma.
I have this, let me know what you think about this. I have this sort of internal battle with labels. It first started for me when I was an athlete. I would just label myself as the sport that I played. And that sort of put me in a box of my identity. And it was cool for a while, right? You want to be a baseball player. I'm a professional wrestler. But then when you get into like the real world and you have to be a person of value and character, I don't know what that is. And so I've tried to like move away from labeling that and move towards like who I want to be as a person. And then I've also thought about this a lot in terms of mental health, because that's sort of the work that I am in very interested in based on a very personal story. And when I think about people who label themselves as depressed, it sort of elongates their experience with that depression. But I also know at the same time that if you don't label it, you're never going to be able to sort of understand that this is what you're dealing with. And it's not you that's flawed. It's just this thing that you're experiencing. So you kind of have to label it at the same time. And so then I don't want people to get trapped in the box. It's like they're only this person who's depressed and they're nothing else. And I think about the same thing with sort of this thing that you're talking about with sexual trauma. And so I have this back and forth about, do we really need to label it? Like, is it super important, or can we be more broad about it? But I feel like with the people that you work with and the sexual trauma, it's probably important to get very specific so you can sort of work through that. But I don't know, what's your take on sort of my my thoughts?
No, that's a great question, and it's an and both. So I think a phrase that I love from my friend Esther Perel, who's a brilliant psychotherapist. She said, "Words inform our experience." We'll just say time. Words inform our experience. So if we say something enough, we can identify with it, and of course, as you were saying, that can be both good or bad. At the beginning of a survivor's process, to really want them to know, to understand what happened to them. Because Aaron, so many people walk through my door and they're just like, this thing happened. I have no idea how to qualify it. I don't even know if it was abuse. Like, that's what I hear first and foremost, because most sexual trauma isn't violent. It's violating, right? There's no or cuts or anything like that. It's not violent. It's a violation of boundaries in a pretty huge way. So once we can name what it is, and then we can go to that bigger picture experience of calling it sexual trauma. And then they get to decide, do I want to call myself a survivor or not? Right? So the word I really don't use is victim. So you're never going to hear me say this, I'm working with a victim of sexual trauma. That's not me. I'm working with survivors of sexual trauma. And again, words inform our experience. So if I was sitting with you and week after week, I kept saying, well, when you were victimized, Aaron, because you're a victim of, like, you're going to take that in, like that word has weight versus, well, Aaron, because of your survivorship and a survivor of sexual trauma, typically ... like that feels different.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more agency in the second one, in surviving something that was fucking horrible rather than being a victim of something that was fucking horrible. You know, you're still alive in both of them, but it's about how maybe you move through the rest of your life, because you're probably going to have another relationship, hopefully, that, you know, potentially changes your mind on this stuff or helps you heal from it or whatever the case may be. And I imagine that's super hard going into another relationship, trusting people or understanding what you like and what you don't like and maybe saying no. And we'll definitely get to that. But before we do, I know that since we're talking about sexual trauma, what are going to be the 4 most prominent trauma reactions that people might have?
Yeah. So the 3 your listeners are probably going to know. So there's fight, flight, and freeze, which most people know what those are. Fight sounds just like what it says it is. The survivor fights back against their perpetrator. Flight, the survivor runs away from their perpetrator. Freeze is profound dissociation. So their autonomic nervous system just kind of shuts down and they go into a freeze state. A lot of survivors will say it's like they leave their body. So they're up here looking down on their body and they kind of have a view of what's happening, but they can't do anything about it. The 4th one, and the lesser known, is called Fawn. So the Fawn response is compliance. The Fawn response is going along to getting along. It's a smile on your face, but it's all being complicit just in hopes of not getting hurt worse.
So
that
one sounds very like a very frightening one.
It is. And that can look like, for a lot of childhood survivors of sexual abuse, they're going to fawn, right? Because they're not going to fight back. They're not going to run away because it's almost always someone known to them, probably even someone in their house or their neighbor. Freeze, that's after years or so many times of doing this, that's not an option anymore. So they just have to be nice in order to get through the experience and make it end sooner.
Yeah. And do you see a lot of those cases where people won't talk about that for 40, 50 years because they've totally tried to just remove that from their brain so they could just move on to the next part of their life?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say on average for a lot of sexual trauma outside of sexual abuse, it's going to be about 10 years between like when, let's say they were date raped and they find themselves in my office, about 10 years of them trying to figure it out, stuff it down, whatever the case may be. For sexual abuse, it's more like 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I'm not exaggerating with 50. I have a gentleman that I've been working with for the last 4 years who was sexually abused between the ages of 9 and 11. And he spoke out about it at 56, 57.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
he's in his 60s.
I can't imagine just holding on to that for so long and just, yeah. Wow. Do you see, men and women who are both sexually traumatized, do they respond in different ways? Is there one that they lean towards one another, or is it both kind of similar?
For childhood sexual abuse, I would say it's quite similar. As they get older, for men, so like a teenage boy, an older teenage boy, or a man in his 20s, he's often going to go to fight or flight. A woman almost never will because she's got no chance. Most of the time, I'm sorry about this. Certainly there are women who are perpetrators. Most of the time it's men who are perpetrators, and then they're just bigger and stronger than women. So she's going to go to freeze or fawn.
Yeah. Did you watch the movie recently that came out, It Ends With Us?
Oh, I haven't seen that one lately. I thought you were going to say Baby Reindeer about the childhood sexual abuse, but no, I need to watch It Ends With Us. But
I haven't watched the reindeer one, but my wife read the book It Ends With Us, and so she wanted to go to the movie, and then she gave me like a little bit of what it was about, and I get a little like sick to my stomach when I see that type of stuff because it's just I can't comprehend anyways. And so, but you can see in the movie it was really well done how manipulative someone can be after they hit someone. And like, this is part of the sexual trauma of being abused. This is more of like the physical side of it where you can see the cuts and all of that. But they do such a cool job. Like, cool is the wrong word, but they do a good job in the filmmaking portion, like making it seem like it was an accident in the beginning part of the movie. And then as it goes on, sorry for those who haven't seen the movie, it's like sort of giving the whole thing away. But like then towards the end of the movie, when the woman realizes like what she's like actually been through, they go back and you can see how the scenes actually played out, where he actually did this. It wasn't really an accident. He actually like did the thing he was doing. And in my mind, I'm like, could be so fucking frustrating to be manipulated in that way and convinced, because it could seem logical, because the person always is like, oh, I love you, I'm doing this for you, I'm doing this for you. And then in your brain you're trying to like, well, I also do have love for this person, so maybe it was an accident. And then it just continues on and on and on. And I mean, I don't really have a question here, I'm just sort of came to my mind, but like it just made me sick to my stomach. And I can't even imagine being a person in that situation. Just like, that's why I would fawn too. I'd be like, yeah, whatever, sure, like just like whatever I need to do to like, hopefully you don't fucking hit me again today, like please. And so yeah, anyways, feelings on that.
And I mean, Aaron, what you just spoke to is the cycle of violence, and what people a lot of times don't understand, and why I appreciate the movie, is there always the makeup or the honeymoon period, right? Mm. And that is so powerful, whether it's sexual abuse, which sometimes rape can be used in a domestic partnership as well, where it's a marriage or a boyfriend and girlfriend. So rape is part of that whole cycle. But there's always that makeup, and there's always the promise of, I'll never do it again. This will never happen again. I'm so sorry. And around they go. Yeah.
Yeah. That was sort of the tipping point for this woman, was like, he was trying to say sorry. And then I don't know, whatever. He was like trying to force himself on her, and they were married at this point. So he feels like he's quote unquote obligated to do whatever he wants. And that was her realization, like, oh shit, he's like not going to stop, even though I'm telling him like, no, I don't want this right now. No. And then she had to throw him off of him. And then she left the house. And like, that was her, like, then you see all these plays right back, all the scenes play back of what actually happened. And it's like, wow. It just like, so it's like scary. And yeah. That's why, I mean, yeah, anyways, we could have a whole nother conversation about masculinity and all of that. But anyways, I sort of got myself off track here talking about that. I didn't know I was going to. Now I sort of got all worked up. But the next thing I wanted to go in with you is this sort of 3-step approach you have when working with people about awareness, understanding, and behavior change. And I thought that was fucking awesome because that can be sort of applied to anything, but you obviously apply it to, you know, trying to get people to heal and live their best life. So talk to me about that process, about how you take people through those 2 steps.
Yeah. So the awareness, and that can be cognitively and somatically. And Aaron, being a professional athlete, you get like the body has so much information if we're willing to tune into it, and especially with survivors of sexual trauma. So chapter 6 in my book really looks at, part of it is the physical or the somatic manifestations of sexual trauma, which people wouldn't necessarily expect. But having that awareness of something happened to me, most sexual trauma survivors are going to be like, I'm anxious here, or I have chronic headaches, or I have IBS, or I'm afraid of needles, or I'm afraid of the dentist, or I have pelvic floor pain. The first thing they're going to think is, I'm fucked up. What's wrong with me? Why am I so broken? Why can everyone else do that and I can't? For years, right? Months or years, until the penny drops, like you were saying in that movie, and they're like, wait a minute, this thing actually happened to me 3 years ago. I wonder if that has something to do with why I think I'm fucked up in these ways. So that awareness, so that gentle awareness comes in. And then from there, hopefully they will reach out to a therapist or someone that can help them, to help them understand it more and really see how kind of covert sexual trauma can be, how it lives in us in a not very, in a way that doesn't present itself clearly, again, because we probably fawned or we probably froze, right? So we're already blaming ourselves. Why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I say no? If you don't understand freeze and fawn, you're going to blame yourself. So you get that more of that understanding around sexual trauma, and then the behavior change. And that's the exciting part, where if the survivor says, I've never had an orgasm because I'm so shut down, I get to work on them with that. If they say I can't maintain a healthy relationship, or I have chronic anxiety, that's the place we go.
And how are you getting to think about people understanding potentially after a traumatic experience, even after you say 10 years, they walk into your office, so they haven't really addressed any of these things that happening. They've potentially had some sexual experiences, probably not very fulfilling ones. How do you get them to start to understand what they like and what they don't like? And, you know, as you call it, your self-pleasure protocol. But what is that? What can that look like?
Yeah. So, I'm going to back up a step. So before I prescribe the self-pleasure protocol, I go through something with my clients called Discovering Your Sexual Template. And that looks at desire and arousal. So desire is the psychological process of wanting. It asks, like, what do I find sexy? Arousal is the psychological process of wanting, and that asks, what turns me on? So I walk them through very gently, just through the 5 senses. When I hear blank, I find that sexy. When I taste blank, I find that sexy. So none of this is really sexually based unless they're pretty advanced in that process. So we're just trying to figure out, like, what is it that I like sexually? Because you can imagine, if you've experienced sexual trauma at some early point in your development, that whole process of discovery has been hijacked. And you're probably going to tell me you like what your partner told you should like, or you're going to tell me like what you saw in porn, because you have no idea what you should like. So this is a stripping down of the process to really figure out, like, what are those sexual elements? Is it sensuality? Is it things around BDSM and power? Is it about Tantra? Is it slow and steady, or is it more assertive? Is it secretive? Is it, more explicit? Like, what are these elements? Once we get that settled, then I prescribe a self-pleasure protocol. And that's a non-genitally based, to begin with, process of self-pleasure, of touching yourself from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, it's non-genitally based. And then I just layer on, right? So then we touch breast or butt or vulva, and then some kind of penetration. eventually get to the point of orgasm, ejaculation. And if they are partnered, then I can bring the partner into that process as well.
My brain immediately went to like tracking a workout, like your numbers on a bench press. Like, do you have people like say like, okay, this felt good today. This was, I could use this. This was like a light pressure, medium pressure. I like when someone touches me here, because you can't remember all this stuff, like unless you're sort of, journaling it or writing it down. I feel like that's an important, but I don't know, maybe people also feel like that's weird too. The heck, this little black book of all their, all their secrets about what they like and don't like. But I think that's amazing. I think that's what you should have, because then it's something you could potentially share, or you can, read or revisit if things change for you, or you develop new things, or you find you want to explore something with someone that you love, or whatever the case may be. Just like looking in your workout journal. I benched like 100 pounds last week and now I'm at 105. That's sweet. Like, so there's always progress to be tracked, but I don't know if people find that but awkward. I guess if they're working with you and they're doing the self-pleasure protocol, they're probably ready to rock and roll, and they're feeling good.
Yeah, well, they are tracking it. I'm asking them to track it. That's part of my job, is like, tell me what works, tell me what didn't work. And they might say, I do not like having my belly touched, but oh my gosh, I loved it when I was touching my neck. Or I like it when my partner touches my lower back, but not my butt. Like, it's all information. And yeah, so we are really tracking it. And I want to thank you to you for saying that things change. So the sexual template, our erotic menu should be flexible. What you like at 22 is going to be different than 32, is going to be different at 42. It's going to be different before you have a baby, after you have a baby. There's all kind of before an illness, after an illness, an accident, all kinds of things can change. Or you could just decide, man, I never liked anal before, but now it's one of my favorite things. Great. Good for you. It works.
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak from personal experience how my sexuality, or at least how I want to have sex, has changed from being a single guy to being a married guy. Is totally different from actually, feeling very connected emotionally to the person I'm having sex with, to not feeling emotionally connected to them at all, only caring about myself and being a very selfish person in bed, to actually focusing on the other person more than myself. Like, those things have evolved for me. And yeah, it had to go through some interesting experiences, and some females that I was sexually involved with had to be very honest with me. And those experiences changed me as a person and led me to be able to have more open and honest conversations, especially with my wife, and what I do like and don't like. And so things are going to absolutely change, especially, at least in my perspective, and I think a lot of guys go through that. It changes when you finally find someone that you really love and care for. You're going to do things a bit differently, and I think that's important, outside of just trying to go to the bar and get laid and then come as fast as possible and then move the fuck on. Like, that's no real way to live a life, and it doesn't actually feel as good as connecting with someone on a very deeper level. And I know there's one night stands, and people think there's casual sex, and all those things exist. Sure, of course, but there's more things, deeper things that can happen that I think feel better, especially when you're done. I think that's the feeling that matters to me the most. Like, when I'm finished, I'm like, oh, like I still feel good. I want to lay next to this person. I still want to touch you, and I want to see how you're doing, and I want to talk about what just happened. Was that good for you? Should we change something next time? Like, what, but before, it's like, okay, I'm good. Thanks. You can go. That's horrible. Like, you know what I mean? And so I've definitely changed. So I know that people definitely can as well, especially if they're experiencing something that's traumatic, because I didn't. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of casual sex, is what I've been thinking about a lot. Do you think that casual sex is like a real thing? It exists. People can do it.
I do. And I know people that can do it. But it lives within a container, and there's that awareness and understanding. And it's very intentional about, this is what I want it to be. So with my couples who are open, a lot of what I work now is with couples who are non-monogamous, and some are very much into the like one night kind of things. We meet another couple, we hook up with them, and that's it. And we don't have any kind of relationship with them. versus the polyamory model or the friends with benefit model, where it's like I have some kind of relationship with this person. So yeah, so casual sex can work. And for some people, because they might have intimacy issues or vulnerability issues, sometimes that's as far as they get. So I don't want to pathologize that. And do I want more for them? Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought a lot about it. I mean, I don't know. I think in my life personally, it never worked. I think I was doing it unintentionally. That's why. Like we talked about at the top, right? If anything is done with intention, it probably is better off than just doing it willy nilly for the sake of doing it. But I don't have to just talk about myself the whole time, but maybe this was a self-indulgent episode to talk to you, Dr. Holly. But anyways, I think, go ahead.
No, I just said it should be all about pleasure. So, but I think if you had been hooking up back then and you were like, I am just doing this for the thrill and for some pleasure, you might have felt better about it instead of going in and then walking away going, damn it, I wish I felt more of an intimate connection, or I wish I liked that person more. Like that was something you were putting on yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you why I went out and tried to have sex with as many girls as possible, because I thought it made me cooler. That's why.
To who?
That's why I did it. It's a great question. To my teammates, to my friends, to just people that I don't know. That's what I thought. And different life experiences will change that, obviously. But initially, because I think I was a late bloomer to having sex and being part of that sort of cool kids group where everyone was talking about it. And I was like, no. And so when I did finally lose my virginity and got to college and all these sorts of things, I was like, well, I got to catch up. Like all these people are way cooler than me. And some of these, not so good thought patterns that we have, but I did it and it is what it is. And so that was the reason for me. And so again, that was the wrong side of intentionality. But it is, that's where it happened. But yeah. And so another thing that comes up, especially when you talk about mental health and you talk about sexual trauma, is this big word of shame. And so how do you have people work through that shame and sort of what's the process that might look like? I know it's very individualized, so it's kind of a harder question. I get that, but just some general tips maybe.
Yeah. So just the high level, and I'm sure all your listeners know this, but guilt versus shame. Guilt is I did something wrong. So Aaron, when you talk about your sexcapades, I don't even know if you think you did something wrong, but you didn't feel great about it, but you might have had a little guilt in the morning. So I did something wrong, versus shame is I am something wrong. Guilt, I made a mistake. Shame, I am a mistake. So when survivors come in, remember, most of the time they went into freeze or fawn. So they didn't fight back, right? They didn't run away. Already, shame just goes whoop, right in and it sticks because they're already like, oh, I must have deserved this. I didn't do enough to stop it. What is wrong with me? So then working through that process, I've got to figure out where it's living in their body. Is it living in body image issues? Is it living in, oh, I don't think I'm smart enough. I'm not capable. I can't have a healthy relationship. Or is it simply just living in sexuality of, I can't give myself an orgasm, or I don't know how to have sex, or every time I have sex, I go into a shame spiral and I'm depressed for a week or two. So I have to really figure out where the shame's living and I just pick it apart. I go back. I'm relentless. I just go back. I go back and I go back until we can reframe. Your body took care of itself. And the reason I know it did is because you are here sitting in front of me, right? If you had tried to fight back, I don't know what would have happened. If you had tried to run away, I don't know what would have happened. So just really normalizing what they did was the right thing.
Yeah. Do you think when it comes to sexual trauma that people feel so much shame is based on sort of how our culture is? Do you think it has a lot to do with that? Like if we had a different one, or there was like more understanding or validation, potentially people wouldn't feel that, or maybe it wouldn't. I don't know if it wouldn't happen. There's always going to be bad people. That's sort of hard to erase from society. But anyways, yeah.
I think so. And I really hope it's changing, since 2017 and the Me Too movement. And we just hear more about sexual trauma now. There's more films about it. There's more books about it. There's more podcasts about it. So as soon as people realize, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one, like that comes to light, then they start talking about it. And then so the 17-year-old that maybe has a mom or a dad that experienced sexual trauma, maybe that mom or dad is going to talk to that child about, hey, no one can touch you. If someone tries to touch you this way, you go find an adult and you come tell me. You are never going to get in trouble, right? Or the teenager that can talk to her friends and one of the friends is like, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound right that your boyfriend's doing that, or your girlfriend. I don't want to make this, there are certainly female perpetrators. So it's really talking about it more. I think, Aaron, things are shifting, or at least I hope they are.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I want to say they are. Then I think, like, you have those like random one or two cases where someone comes forward and it turns out to be false, and you feel like it fucks everything up because they're like, that's everyone. That's all of the cases. That's all of this. And it's like, no, that's like the one case you saw out of like zillions that didn't go through. They're actually legit and real. And like reporting is super hard. And it's very, very like scary to actually go up there and say like, this happened to me. I'm trying to report it, to even say it out loud. Because as you said, people don't go to a therapy for 10 years. So it's not like they're willy nilly just going to go to a police station and be like, this happened to me. I know it. Like, that's all that is so scary. And so I know you've talked about a lot about it doesn't have to be reported for it to be real, right? You talked about just a sense of violation of what you know to be right. And I think that's really important. And so social media has done a lot too, like to maybe do a better job. I don't know. Also have an interesting take on social media. I'm sure you do as well. It's got a sort of a double-edged sword, but it's not going anywhere. And so speaking of reporting, what does that look like? And why do people think that that's like the only way to make the sexual trauma legit, even though it's not, obviously?
It's not. And thank you for bringing that up. So just so we're clear, survivors don't frequently false report. Sexual trauma is false reported at exactly the same rate as any other felony. So it's like 7 to 8%. It just doesn't happen because it's an awful, awful process. More so than reporting a burglary or some other crime. Every survivor that I've ever talked to that has reported is re-traumatized by the reporting process. And please know, this is not me saying don't report. It's like, please report. Like, please report and buckle up a little bit, because it is not easy. Like, people do not do this willy-nilly because it's a bitch. Like, it's tedious. You get grilled. Why did it take you so long to say anything? Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you go get a rape kit right after? Why? Right? So then the sexual trauma survivor has to dig deep, and then she or he has to know, because I wasn't supported at home, because I had no idea what happened to me, all of the reasons that we know so well.
Yeah. I mean, it could easily make you think that all of it was your fault as well, based on some of that questioning. And then I'm sure you spiral back into the shame cycle of, I shouldn't have worn this, I shouldn't have done this, when really none of that is true. You ran into someone who was a perpetrator and an abuser, and that's why it happened. That's the sole reason why, not because, you did anything or whatever it is that people, you try to convince themselves that they were doing. And so that's probably a really hard part of getting over it. I would imagine, when you're working with people.
It is. You just said that beautifully. I don't think I can say it any better. But the only reason people are raped or sexually abused or sexually harassed is because they come across a perpetrator. Like, that is it. I don't care if you had 4 margaritas. I don't care if you were wearing short shorts. None of that matters. One of the things I say is, I don't care if you were sitting on a street corner naked. The only reason you would be raped is because a rapist walked by. Most people would have brought you a coat. Can you imagine, like, someone sitting on a street corner naked? What do? You go, you cover them up, you get them help, except when the rapist, right?
Right.
That's it. Reason. No other reason, the whole wide world.
Yeah. That's as like fact of matter as you can say it. Have you seen this bear versus man conversation online, Dr. Holly?
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on it?
Oh gosh. I only watched a little bit of it. I don't, I, Aaron, at the end of the day, I believe in the goodness of humanity and I believe in the
Mm-hmm.
goodness of men. So I want to believe most men are good. And if I was left in the woods, I would rather encounter a man than a bear at the end of the day. And yeah, there's some skeevy, awful humans out there, but I really like if I focus too much on the perpetrator side of the story, I can get lost. So I just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand why someone would choose the bear. I get it. Because I've talked to a lot of friends, females in my life who've had trauma, and they're like, this is why I would pick it. Like in that, and I can't tell them that's wrong because this is their experience and their story, and that logically makes sense to me. The only thing that bothers me is that we as men haven't done a good enough job to convince the majority of women that we are good. That's what, like, it makes me sad because I know so many fucking good men. Like, it's the only reason I'm halfway decent is because the men in my life through sports teams or coaches or my dad or whatever the case may be. And so it breaks my heart to know that women just, like, their knee-jerk reaction is to assume that the guy in the woods is going to be an abuser or a rapist. And they're not thinking about their dad that was great, or their brother that's fucking awesome, or their best friend who's took care of them or is taken, whatever the case may be. So my own, like, I'm never going to say someone's wrong with how they think because that's their story and that's their experience and that's what they think to be true. Great. Perfect. The only hesitation I have is it breaks my heart that we haven't done a good enough job to convince the majority of women that we are good. And we need to do better. That's all there is to it. And you could say on the other side that there may be an attack on masculinity and whatever the case may be is. But if we're going to take an agency over our life, we just have to say that I'm going to do the best I can all of the time to try and be the person that I know I can be. And especially for the women around me and for the next generation and for all of these sorts of things. So when I look at this man versus bear conversation, it's kind of whatever, but it does show sort of where we're leaning in terms of what we think of the other sex. And we need each other. We need the other sex. We need partnerships. We need collaboration. It doesn't matter really what type of relationship you're in. Like, connection is the cornerstone of life. And if you don't have it, life is just not as good. And so I think that's where my sort of head goes when I hear those types of conversations.
Did you see the little riff on that? So it's like a woman is hiking up the trail and a guy is hiking down. It's like how to make a woman feel comfortable in the woods. And the guys portray themselves in a more feminine light, but they'll be like, girl, I love those hiking shoes. Or, oh my God, where did you get that hiking jacket? Oh my God, I'm with Beyonce. You want to do a little dance party? So it's just
funny. Yeah. To totally flip the script here, let's jump to one of my favorite things, which is psychedelics. And I know you got something going on there. So what does psychedelics have to do with healing with sexual trauma? How does that go together?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about one specific psychedelic. And I think in some ways, psychedelics can be applied across the board, but 5-MeO DMT found me. So this is a harder medicine to get. It is not legal in the United States. So I go to Mexico to do the medicine. That's where the retreats are held. So 5-MeO DMT is a very powerful psychedelic, and it can very much take our ego offline. We can have the mystical experiences. The reason I love it for survivors of sexual trauma is because it's fast acting and short duration. So you take the medicine and you go as deep as you want, but you're only gone for 20 minutes, 40 minutes tops. And when you are out, you are out. Your feet are firmly back on the ground and you have had that experience. Aaron, I don't know how much you read about my work, but in my Reclaiming Pleasure protocol, so there's 3 parameters that I work my clients through and the people at the trauma retreats. The first is control. So within control, of course, a survivor is going to want to have control of her body, who she's with, her environment. That makes sense. The second aspect of control is relinquishing control. And that's really where the power is and where the growth is. So what a psychedelic can do is it helps us step into that space of relinquishing control. I take this medicine and I am out of control for a little while, yet I am still safe, right? So I don't have to have that rigidity around how I maintain control, my diet, my exercise, my home, who I hang out with, all the ways we control the shit out of our lives, right? So we've got the rigidity over here and the laxity or the collapse over here. What we're trying to do is find that place of flexibility. And so the medicine, 5-MeO-DMT, can just be that little like shove off the cliff into I am willingly relinquishing control and I'm safe and I'm going to have this mystical experience. Let my ego go offline for a little bit and really tap into the essence of me.
Wow. Yeah. I've only done mushrooms, and the duration is much longer. It's like a 5 or 6 hour duration. But the feeling that I got so much was like you sort of are here, and then your body is like over the top of you looking at you. And you can get this sort of different perspective that you just can't get in sort of this regular, plane that we're in now. And so it allows you to just have a different perspective, to slow down, to see things a little bit differently, to try and think about what you want to do when you get off of this sort of trip that you're on, like what, path you want to take. And of course, there's on at least on mushrooms, there's a varying degree of peaks and valleys of crying, of not crying, of going through something hard and difficult and all these sorts of things. But it can be a transformative experience. But most importantly, people have to, or should not, they don't have to do anything. They should go through with a professional like you, because there can be a lot of dangerous things that come through it. Because there's so much stuff about psychedelics these days. And I think just like anything, people might take them sort of willy nilly, and like, this could be the one shot fix all to all of my issues. And that's just not the case. It could be a great additive to the other work that you're doing, but you still have to do the work in terms of, all the stuff that you talk about in terms of awareness, understanding, and behavior change. But that's really cool. So you're running retreats with that drug?
Yeah, in Mexico, and I don't serve the medicine at all. So I work with this wonderful woman named Victoria. We do it at Tandava Retreat Center in Tepoztlan, Mexico, where it is legal. She is just brilliant with dosing, and we know it's safe. We have a nurse on staff. So the retreats are either 5 or 6 days. And so you either have 2 medicine days or 3 medicine days, and we can titrate up. So we start with a pen, be a very low dose, and then insufflation, so through the nose, and then the bigger dose is through something called the lamp. It's more like you smoke it, you inhale it, and that's where you can have that ego dissolution that I just know so many of us are looking for. We just want to get out of our own way. Like, I'm so sick of my story. I'm so sick of my narrative. Like, why I'm so attached to this is who I am. And I think what psychedelics do, which you said really, really beautifully, is just like, let me see a different perspective. Maybe there's another story here that I haven't considered. Yeah.
Another story that you haven't considered could be good. Could be the unwritten story, the story you're about to write. All of that could be cool. Maybe not last question, but I'll say last question if something else comes to mind. But what's something that you really want people to know about sex or sexual trauma that maybe we haven't covered, or something that's like really passionate to you about, or misunderstood, or just like, one of those things?
Yeah. So I got 2 answers. The first is my definition of sex positivity. So sex positive, all sex is good sex as long as it's consensual and pleasurable. So this can help people alleviate shame so much. So we've got 2 boxes to check. Is my experience consensual? Is it pleasurable? We don't get to say weird, perverted, not normal, all of those things those judgments we tend to throw at sex. And trust me, Erin, when I'm sitting down with some people, they will tell me a kink that I've never heard of in my life. And I do the math really quick. I'm like, okay, is that consensual? Is it pleasurable? Okay. You like elbows? Here we go. Let's talk about it.
Right on.
So it's just like putting down that judgment. And then in the sexual trauma piece, again, we said it before, but most sexual trauma is not violent, it's violating. So if you think you're a survivor, you're probably a survivor. If there's something that felt traumatic, it probably is traumatic. You didn't need to have a bruise or a scar to prove it. it's a violation of boundaries, and that's kind of the end of that story.
Yeah. Yeah. Like specifically on trauma, I think people think they have to reach like this level of suck before it has to mean something. They have to reach like a certain hierarchy, because like we can always conceptualize that somebody has it worse. Yeah. Somebody does have it worse, I'm sure. Like, yeah, that's probably true. But that doesn't mean your level of this was horrible is not good enough to talk about. And I think people get wrapped up in that because we can see all of these horrors of terrible things happening on social media. And then we look at our own life and we potentially have food and water and shelter and things are okay, but still this horrible thing happened to us over here. And we're like, nah, I got to brush that away. I can't talk about it because it's not as bad as someone else's. And I haven't reached this horrible level where whatever, I don't even want to think of something that level of, but I think that's what a lot of people think about when they're thinking about their trauma and being violated, because again, like you're saying, it's not like, getting thrown down the stairs or getting raped or being abused or touched by someone who's older adult and you're 9 years old or whatever the case may be. And so I think that's very challenging, very challenging.
It is. Aaron, it sounds like you've had a traumatic experience. So there was probably a point in your recovery where there's that, you're trying to measure the suffering, right? What you're talking about, like we can't measure suffering. And when I say that, of course, a rape is worse than a stubbed toe. Like, don't be an idiot. But we also can't say that mine didn't mean anything because, I just got date raped, but my sister's friend was molested by her dad for 9 years. Like it serves us not at all to try to measure suffering. We just have to acknowledge it, right? That awareness of, wow, this hurts. And I'm acting out in all these ways, or I have addiction issues, or I have whatever it is that's going on for me, but it's attached to that. It's not a personal failing on mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we'll end with something that I heard on a different podcast you're on, sort of your contentious take that there's no such thing as sex addiction. Is that still something that you believe?
It is. It is.
Great.
Yeah. So I think when we're talking about sex addiction, we're not talking about addiction. We're talking about anxiety. So pathologizing sex addiction, I think it can just be problematic. So I'm going to say more. I treat sexual compulsivity all the time. I can turn around to these books on my shelf and have some on treating out of control sexual behavior. So you're going to hear out of control sexual behavior and compulsivity. What you don't hear is the word addiction. Here's why I say that. To me, an addiction is a physiological dependence. Aaron, if you were addicted to heroin and I took it away, you would die, right? I have to tie you off it. Aaron, if you're addicted to porn and I take it away, guess who's not dying? I've never seen I've never seen from porn.
100%. Right.
So it's a behavioral addiction at best. That's the best I can do. The other reason I don't like to say it is because Harvey Weinstein's and the like get caught doing so much horrible shit. And then they go to some posh retreat center in Arizona for sex addiction. And they're there for 30 days and 60 days. And they get to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm an addict. And it gets pathologized. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're not an addict. You're an asshole. Like there's a difference. Like take responsibility for your behavior. That said, there's my little rant. There are so many people that are suffering because they have a compulsion around pornography or a compulsion around sex. I get it. I want you to get help for that, whether it's the sex addiction model or the sex therapy model that is more holistically based. Totally up to you. Just get the help you need. I don't care what you call it.
Yeah. Beautiful. I wanted to hear that take on it, and that was awesome. So thank you. Where do you want to drive people? I mean, your website will be linked in the show notes. Also, your book will be linked in the show notes. Is there anywhere else you want to drive people?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So drhollyrichmond.com is getting a makeover this late fall, winter. So I'm going to be offering a coaching collective. So you can work with me or you can work with 8 other people with very different specialties. Aaron, you'll probably be interested in this. I'm bringing in someone who's a personal trainer and doing holistic nutrition, someone who works with peptides, someone who works with hormone replacement therapy. So there'll just be links to this whole holistic group of people. As I've been going through things at this point in my life, I'm just like, sex just can't live in its own little container here. It's all of us. Sex and self are not dualistic. I am my sexuality. My sexuality is me, but I'm also all of these things. So just trying to provide resources for them.
Beautiful. Amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for being open and honest and vulnerable and all of those beautiful things. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.